The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Headhunters 101 webinar brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association. I'm Drew Webb, and I'm so glad you could join us this afternoon. This webinar is just one resource of many that Vanderbilt provides to our alumni, so be sure to familiarize yourself with the additional services that we offer at vuconnect.com/career. Today's webinar will last around 30 minutes with time at the end for questions. Please feel free to type questions in as you have them in the question box on the side panel of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will make sure that these are addressed in some way before time is up today. We're also recording today's webinar, and we'll post it on the Expert Advice webpage and VU Connect, and we will also share the slides with you via email. I'm very pleased to now introduce you to today's presenter and Vanderbilt alumnus, Wills Moore. Wills is the sector leader for Korn Ferry Future Steps Logistics, Distribution, and Transportation practice in North America. In this role, he is responsible for coordinating all aspects of client engagement and thought leadership across Future Steps service offerings, which include retained search, recruitment process outsourcing, talent acquisition projects, and employer branding. In the past 2 years, Wills has led engagements across all functions within the LDT sector for clients ranging from private equity-backed small and mid-cap companies to Fortune 100 market leaders. He also works extensively with global companies headquartered outside of the U.S. and is also a member of the Human Resources Functional Practice. Prior to joining FutureStep, Will spent 15 years in a variety of HR leadership roles with global organizations in the U.S. and Europe. Earlier in his career, he worked for another leading executive search firm in their industrial practice. Will speaks business-level German and French and has an MBA from Georgia State University and an undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt University. I'm excited to now turn over today's presentation to Wills.
Thank you, Drew, and hello to everybody out there. This is an interesting first-time experience for me because this is kind of a one-way street. When I told my wife I was doing this and that there wouldn't be any kind of audience to respond back to my bad jokes, she thought I was going to struggle. So I'm just going to imagine that all of you are laughing at the appropriate times and otherwise fully engaged in what I'm saying. Excited to connect with my fellow Commodores and share some of the, I guess, some perspective on the recruiting world, hopefully educate folks, and look forward to a lot of good questions. I'm going to go through, this is a fairly high-level discussion and intended really just to kind of maybe educate you a little bit and also hopefully pique questions, or maybe everybody has different specific things that they're looking to get out of this. So I'm looking forward to some engagement. So quickly before I start, I will take a minute to introduce Korn Ferry. We are the world's largest talent management consulting and executive search firm. We're a $1.8 billion publicly traded company, and we are global. We do work across a number of different, all really industry sectors and functional areas, and we do a lot of work in addition to recruiting, and we do a lot of work with leadership development, compensation, and then we also do things like help companies outsource parts of their recruiting function. So we're a very diversified firm, and very interesting times to be doing this business. I'm returning to executive recruiting after a 15-year hiatus. When I first got into it was when I first got my first email address back in the late 90s to age myself. So it's been interesting to see what's the same and what's changed since I came back. So to jump in here, I'm going to talk about kind of three things. I guess maybe some high-level observations and perspective on career management, which is something I think we're all doing, and obviously the alumni organization is doing a great job of providing a lot of different perspectives on this type of activity. Go into some detail, secondly, about the world of executive recruiters, how they work, what types there are, and maybe some best practices at the end around how to try to engage with them. So we will jump right in here. First, I'll start with, there's a lot of data out there. Interesting to see just two things I picked out here, which are kind of conflicting in my mind. So majority of recruiters say that the market is what's called candidate-driven now, and I would say that's very true here in the U.S., meaning that if you're a talented candidate, it's a seller's market, where as opposed to kind of 2010 after the economic downturn, it was the other way around. At the same time, there are still just a tremendous number of people applying for jobs online, wherever through any channel that's possible. So, if you do the math here, only about 2% of resumes that are submitted for a role that's posted are actually taken forward. So it's an interesting paradox, I think, today. You may be a superstar, you may have a lot to offer and be ready to make a move. It's still difficult to get traction and get on people's radar screen, including the radar screen of recruiters. So want to give you, hope to give you a little bit more insight into that as we go along here. So managing your career in today's world, what I consider somewhat anti-social media. So obviously for me, I'm 48. I've been out of school since 1990. It's been pretty amazing to watch the internet boom and watch things like LinkedIn develop, and it's interesting to see kind of what it's done when people are looking for a job. And just to also maybe share a little perspective, I've been downsized personally twice, and so I've been through a job search, one that lasted almost a year. So I feel like I've got a good perspective from both sides of the table, and it is an interesting process to go through, especially depending on what your individual circumstances are. But I would say, I think that in a way, the internet has made it harder to find a job because there's a lot more white noise out there. As I alluded to earlier, a lot of people are applying online, a lot of people who are not qualified. Recruiters are inundated by, emails, applications. They are struggling, I think, to find the time to really do a thorough analysis of applicants and to really pick out the stars from everybody else. So it's something just to, it's kind of stating the obvious, but I think it's something to always keep in mind in terms of a job search. The second thing I think is that everybody involved in hiring has major ADD. That's obviously a bit of an extreme statement, but again, companies are asking people to do more with less today. Hiring managers are being pulled in a lot of different directions. It's hard to get, and I can speak to this from my current role. It's very hard to get on their radar screen and get them to really think through and look at candidate resumes, assessments, those kind of things. So anybody involved in the process is being pulled in a lot of different directions, and that's part of what you as a potential candidate are kind of having to take into account. The third bullet point here, hiring managers are more risk averse than ever. I think certainly since the economic downturn, again, companies are asking people to do more with less. Headcounts continue to be, held steady or reduced. So when a manager has a vacancy, it's in my experience that they are ultra conservative in making the right hire, and they're worried about making a mistake because they don't want to be back in the same boat again. So it's an interesting consideration as well in the process in terms of how you differentiate yourself and make a potential hiring manager a level of comfort. Branding is very important. This is something that we see more and more. I think there's a fine line here. Some people kind of a lot of people do a great job of it. There's a certain amount of it that might be I think valuable. There's probably a lot of times you can do overkill and with just about anything like something like this, in terms of constant postings on LinkedIn or whatever the case may be. But I think it is important to think about your brand, to try to maybe occasionally publish something or retweet something that's significant, but it's obviously something as well to be conscious of. So taking a soundbite approach to presenting yourself, again, if you think about this world where everybody's attention span is shorter, people retain less information today. In the case of recruiters, we're looking at literally dozens of resumes every day sometimes. So what you're trying to do is leave people with the 2 or 3 things about you as an individual that stand out. And so when you're asked to summarize your background or tell me about your 2 or 3 key successes in your last role. It's important to be able to really articulate that succinctly and briefly, and whenever possible, I think, tie some kind of number to it. That's if, in terms of grew sales by 20% or reduced headcount, whatever the case may be. But anything that can just help, again, boil down and help people kind of just remember something about you that they're going to come back and connect to. And then a real LinkedIn connection is somebody willing to walk your resume down the hall. Again, LinkedIn is a fascinating tool. It's fascinating in terms of social dynamics. We're seeing a movement now for people who are. I've got a couple of people I'm connected to who are very somewhat aggressively posting when people do things. When people are posting Facebook-like information on LinkedIn. So there's a lot of different dynamics around LinkedIn. But as a rule of thumb, I take a very kind of conservative view of my network and wanted to consider being connected with people who I truly have something in common with or truly know in some way, shape, or form. So I don't connect, frankly, with all the candidates that I work with. I will connect with somebody that I actually place at a company, but I work with a lot of different candidates. Of course, I get beyond that lots and lots of requests to connect for people I don't know because of my profession. And again, I just kind of take the view of, if somebody reaches out to me, somebody that I know well, and says, hey, I see you're connected to Drew Webb, what do you know about him? Can I really say, well, I know Drew and I can tell you this, that, or the other, or I don't know Drew at all, I just connect with him on LinkedIn. So I think it's an important consideration because if and when you go through a job search, your LinkedIn network is a critical tool that can be extremely effective, especially if you've got really what I would consider high caliber connections. So those are just some broad observations, somewhat random, but I think it's interesting to, again, from the perspective I'm sitting in as an executive recruiter doing this every day, and obviously everybody's in a different situation, but certainly important to kind of maintain a good degree of self-awareness about what it's like out there when you're looking for a job. So let's shift gears to talking about recruiters. So obviously I use the title Headhunter 101 in the title to, as much as anything, try to attract participation. Drew and I were trying to be creative marketing. So obviously I don't consider myself a headhunter. I think it doesn't bother me as a term. It's kind of a humorous term, but I prefer the picture on the left to the picture on the right, obviously, in terms of what we do. I think we do add a lot of value and are trying to really, more and more today, having to drill down and really figure out, fit for people between candidates and companies, culture fit, what's going to be, things like derailers, what's going to keep someone from being successful, that kind of thing. So it's an interesting, it's a very interesting line of business. It's fascinating in a lot of ways, and also, again, has somewhat of a reputation, I think, because of quality issues, and probably there are a number of people on this call who could maybe point to some negative experiences they've had with recruiters, and that's probably deserved in a lot of those cases. So I think, like a lot of potential service industries, there are a broad range of there's a broad range of quality and reputation out there, and so that's one of the things we'll talk about a little bit further is how do you try to figure out who's going to represent you well and who does good work. So the recruiting dating game, I mean, obviously why work with recruiters? I think some of the things that I mentioned before, recruiters can have very strong access to companies and individuals, hiring managers that you might not otherwise be able to get. They also have a vested interest. Once they decide to present you to a client, then they're putting both their reputation and your reputation on the line. So obviously it's in their best interest to help prepare you for an interview. Sometimes I find sometimes, especially with people who may not have changed jobs as frequently, that I'm able to also help them think about some of their accomplishments in a better or more significant sense. So, all sometimes guilty of being our own worst critic in terms of what we have achieved or not achieved. So that's something that I enjoy trying to do sometimes with candidates as well, is just calling those out and making sure that they see those as strengths and selling points, and are going to bring those to light with my clients. So the challenge with all this is that we love you a lot of times when you don't want to love us, and vice versa. So it's and I'm sure everybody on this call has experienced this. I get a lot of calls, again, requests from people. I get a lot of emails asking for, I'm in a job search mode. I could literally probably spend every day responding to those and talking to people and hearing, understanding what they do and thinking about how to help them. It's such a timing game with our business, in terms of whether we're working on, at the moment that somebody is reaching out to us, whether we're working on a relevant assignment that is a good fit for them. So that's something you have to keep in mind, that it is a bit of a numbers game, and it's kind of a, again, it goes both ways in terms of, you might get calls from recruiters when you're not interested or looking, or might not be in a place in your life personally where you're ready to make a move. At the same time, you might, 3 months later, 6 months later, be in the exact opposite situation. So it's just part of the overall dynamic, I think, that's important to keep in mind. So types of recruiters, the industry is very fragmented. Obviously, with a phone and a computer, I can set up shop in my garage. So there are, the majority of recruiters out there are either individuals or, small firms who have just a handful of people. So that's just something to keep in mind, that it's a very fragmented industry that is out there. And there are, because of that, there are, recruiters specialize in every possible aspect of the market. So obviously, there are people who specialize in function. There are experts in, just geography. I'm based in Atlanta, so there are some people who are really have great networks here in Atlanta and do great work. And they only work with Atlanta-based clients. There are recruiters who only work with like private equity-backed firms who may be of a certain size, or the opposite of that. Maybe there are certain firms that only work with major, public or Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 type companies. There are also, of course, a lot of different recruiters working at different levels. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then there are boutique firms versus a national or global firm like Korn Ferry. So a boutique firm would be, again, one that's very niche, specialized in an area. Things like cybersecurity, which is a very hot, area right now. There's a huge shortage of talent. So there are firms that have sprung up and developed over time that just do work in that area. And so we compete against them, and sometimes we win and sometimes we don't. And a lot of times, a boutique firm, part of their story is that they are small. They have limited. They're not really limited in terms of where they can go, companies they can go into to talk to candidates. So there's quite a diversity here. But it's important, obviously. The bottom line is, as you thinking about the function you're in or the industry, you want to be keeping that kind of thing in mind as you think about building or developing a strategy as part of management plan to develop and maintain a relationship with hopefully a few recruiters. So there are two basic business models in the recruiting industry in terms of how we get paid. Contingency is the majority of that, and then retained, which is what I do. And I'm going to go into a fair amount of detail on the differences here in the next few slides, but I'll start by saying both models offer a lot of value depending on the circumstances. They offer a lot of value to companies for different reasons. We compete in some cases against contingency firms, sometimes others against retained firms. But it's important to understand how a company is, how they work, how they go to market, how the company is being compensated by their clients. as part of the process, I would say. So the next few slides have a lot of words on them. I just tried to highlight a few things in each of the definitions about the differences between retained and contingent. Basically, a retained search firm is really doing much more start to finish. We'll start with a blank sheet of paper. We help write the job description. We'll create a target list. We are then developing a list of candidates from a lot of different sources who are not necessarily looking for a job. So part of what a company is hiring us to do is to go after what's called the passive candidate market. So there's nothing more than a hiring manager would love than to find somebody who is super successful and doing extremely well for their competitor, or a close facsimile thereof, and wants to bring them over to do the exact same thing for their company. We also, of course, get involved in assessing, doing background checks and those kind of things. Contingency recruiting firms tend to be much more on the front end of companies work with them to really generate a pool of candidates, and then they really take the resume, the candidate resume largely, and then take it from there with their internal talent acquisition function. So again, different dynamics, different model. If you've experienced both, typically going to have different levels of conversation and engagement with somebody who's with a retained firm versus a contingent firm. So the business model, I'll skip down to the bottom, the red boxes here, because this is important to think about or understand. Because of the model, because of the retained firms charge more, and again, because largely we're going a lot deeper. We're doing kind of, we're really in it with the client until there's a successful outcome. So it's a different, when a company decides to hire us and basically pay our fee over the course of the first 90 days versus bring in a contingency firm or maybe a couple of contingency firms to try to fill a role, it's a very different strategy if you can think about that, because obviously on a success-based contingent model, the recruiting firm doesn't have as much skin in the game. So it's just obviously important for you as a potential candidate working with those firms to be aware of the differences. And it shouldn't make a difference really at the end of the day. If you're qualified and a great fit for a role, it's not going to make a difference at the end of the day to the company that's hired one or the other firm where you came from. One thing about retained firms is typically we have an exclusive on the role we're working on, so we're not out competing against contingency firms because we're trying not to cloud the market, so to speak, with mixed messaging about how many different entities are working on trying to fill a position. So methodology, I touched on that. You can read through this, but again, on the retained side, we're going much more, it's really like a true consulting project. We're going very deep on understanding industry dynamics, competitors, getting into, talking about the organization that the position is going to have underneath them potentially. What does the tenure of the team look like? What's the culture look like? All those kind of things, and that feeds into the process then going forward. Contingency firms are more really just, again, focused on trying to gain a high-level understanding of the role and then driving activity in terms of resumes and prospective candidates to their client. So target assignment, contingency firms, and I'll show you the next slide, I think shows kind of more of a graphic view of that in terms of the level from a compensation standpoint, that who works where. Contingency firms tend to work, maybe I'll just go on to, let's see, I'll come back to this. I'll just jump to this and then maybe go back. So contingency firms tend to work here, as you see at the bottom, on positions that pay anywhere from literally, starting salary, minimum wage, up to just above the six-figure level, I would say. So there's an overlap area, as you see there, between probably $100,000 and $150,000. where we both types of firms work on it, and then above that, it's largely companies are investing in and working with retained recruiting firms to fill those positions. From a titling standpoint, it would be probably up to the contingency firms their sweet spot tends to be kind of up to and including senior manager and director. A retained firm would be, kind of director up to C-suite and board level. I'll come back to this slide in just a second. So target assignments, I'll skip that. Candidate perspective. So we'll talk about this some more in a few minutes. So obviously, as I mentioned before, a retained firm we're approaching passive candidates, and part of what you should keep in mind potentially as a potential passive candidate who's approached is, being opportunistic. You never know when things are going to change in your current situation, but also you never know when you might be in a great job right now, and then somebody might call with, the most amazing job ever that's a perfect fit. So obviously I'm a little biased about this, but even when I wasn't in the recruiting business directly, I was always open to and interested in talking to folks in this business, in part because they have their pulse on their finger on the pulse of the market. They're really in the know on trends, what's happening, especially if they're like an industry vertical like mine is logistics. So it's always interesting to exchange information and ideas with executives, and they're looking for the same thing. Okay, so back to doing the math. So this is shifting gears a little bit in terms of a job search. So one of the mistakes I see with people, and I get a lot of experience and really enjoy coaching people on career transition, because I've been through it, as I mentioned. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's important to have help, I think. So one of the things that I find people do, especially kind of at that level here between, I don't know, 50,000 to 150,000, is they put too much of their attention into the recruiter basket. And again, we've all read a lot and heard a lot about networking and the importance of that, but it is very true still. I couldn't find actual hard data during my research, but I think it is still probably true that 70 to 80% of people find roles through their network rather than directly through a paid recruiting firm. So that's just kind of a starting point as a rule of thumb. It is worth the investment of time, certainly, but again, you'll find that sometimes you kiss a lot of frogs before a recruiter turns into a Prince Charming like yours truly, in terms of, you might reach out to a lot of them and not get a response, and that's pretty discouraging, and obviously makes you kind of think negatively about that. But I encourage you, as part of a broader career management strategy, and certainly when you're in an active job search, to pursue that, and I'll talk about that in just a minute in terms of some thoughts on the best approach there. So let's do that right now. Best practices. I'm just going to run through these, and again, happy to answer questions. When you're looking, call first and then email, believe it or not. So, email has just become so ubiquitous, so kind of overwhelming for a lot of people. To me, it's almost like getting the form letter, dear Madam, Sir, please accept my application, blah, 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 or dear hiring manager. So if somebody, is really motivated to talk to me, my information's out there all over the place. It's easy for them to find my phone number and how to connect with me. So I'm impressed if somebody calls and introduces themselves or leave a message and then follows up with an email. Phone a friend. Obviously, if you don't know recruiters in your space, then reach out to friends or colleagues who might. And again, they'll have, probably everybody will have some. You may get different inputs on that in terms of, experiences that people have had. But ideally, most people at a certain level, career-wise, have developed at least one or two recruiter relationships over time. Being consistent, this is about follow-up and, obviously meeting commitments. If you say you're going to send a resume, do it. If you haven't heard from somebody or you don't get a response, it's worth making 2 or 3 efforts to do that without being annoying. You don't do it day 1, day 2, day 3, but you might want to do it every week or so. And then last but not least, of course, is be realistic. As I mentioned, back to the idea of recruiters not loving you when you want to love them and vice versa. So you have to be optimistic and kind of stay motivated to connect with somebody, but you also have to understand that you probably are not going to hear back from a lot of potential people you reach out to without some kind of common thread. So when you're not looking, and this is more important probably and probably more relevant to a lot of you today, institute what I would call a customer relationship management approach, which is, basically hopefully when you can connect with a recruiter, try to make it a note somewhere, a reminder to reach out to them every 3 or 4 months, just a call or an email, but something that's consistent so that you're always somewhat, top of mind, especially if you kind of had a good initial connection with them, or maybe you were a candidate on a previous search. But that repetitiveness is important and will pay dividends. Always listen, as I said before. I think it's always worthwhile to be open to opportunities. I think it's a great practice to get interview experience anytime, really. But I would encourage you to listen and offer to try to help with referrals if you're not interested. And then be specific about what you're looking for if what they call you about is not a fit. So, tell them I'm looking only in Atlanta and I want companies between $200 and $500 million. Excuse me. Again, the more they can be on target, if you've got a great background, but they call you with something that's not a fit, the more they can be on target with the right opportunity, then you're helping them, and obviously they're helping you. A couple of quick observations about LinkedIn. Obviously not Facebook. You'd be amazed, though. We have some hilarious emails that are sent around here about candidates on LinkedIn and their profile pictures and things like that. So I think it goes without saying, but it's just one of those things to use common sense, maybe ask a colleague or somebody who's not a close friend to say, what do you think of my LinkedIn profile picture? Because you'd be surprised at the things that are out there. Connecting the dots. So like a resume, I recommend LinkedIn profile to be largely a version of your resume. So it should show job history. You don't have to go into a lot of detail on things you did early in your career, but you should show, as much as you can in terms of work history. And obviously, focus on the last 5 years, and I'm going to talk about that more with this next box about your resume. And then, of course, why should we connect? So have a value proposition. Obviously, anybody who's a fellow alumni from Vanderbilt, I'm thrilled to connect with you all. And you never know how we can help each other, but there needs to be, I think, something in it for both people, really. So I think that gets back to that. A connection, a true connection, is going to be willing to walk down the hall and take your resume to put it in front of somebody or something like that. And then last but not least, resumes. Resumes are hilarious and interesting because, of course, you ask 10 people for their opinions and you get 10 different ideas. So, again, I'm the same way, but here are some of my kind of rules of thumb and things I would see that are mistakes. Limit it to 2 or 3 pages. It's really only kind of a door opener for you, and if it's too long, it's going to be a door closer. Even if you've been working like I have for 25 plus years, and what companies and people are most interested in, to the second bullet point, is what have you been doing really the last 5 years. So as a rule of thumb, you should be dedicating more space on your resume to your more recent role, last 2 roles especially, and obviously earlier roles, what you did right out of college 20 years ago. I'm interested to know the company title, tenure, but I don't want to have 5 or 10 bullet points because it was so long ago it's not relevant. The fourth bullet point here is, tell me in 2 sentences kind of what your day job is. What do you do day to day? What is your job description? Don't copy and paste your whole job description in your resume. More importantly, I want to know what have you accomplished that makes you unique and is going to make you interesting to my client. And those are usually things that are, action words. They have numbers linked to them. Again, grew revenue, led a $50 million project, whatever the case may be. But again, back to this soundbite mentality, that's really, I can't stress enough how important it is to try to tell those stories succinctly like that, because you're going to help yourself, you're going to help us, you're going to help anybody who's in the process of trying to assess the fit to do that more easily. And then last but not least is good old spelling and grammar. You'd be amazed at how many. So I was a political science major at Vanderbilt. I should have been an English major, I realize, because I'm a frustrated 9th grade English teacher probably at heart, but I'm big on finding spelling mistakes, and now it's kind of a bit of a game, especially with job descriptions from companies that we work with. So just, take the time to have somebody else read through your resume, especially when you update it. You'd be amazed at how frequently people have a spelling mistake in there. I don't think it's as much of a deal breaker anymore. I mean, certainly it's not something that I'm going to cast out somebody's resume because of that, but it just is another kind of brick in the wall for either making or not a great impression. Last thing is just some sources of information, and there's a tremendous amount of information out there. These are 2 organizations that work and are very knowledgeable and kind of connected with the recruiting industry. And then I came across this article in the Wall Street Journal from a few years ago, which is really good. There's a hot link in here, so when Drew shares the deck with you, you'll have this. And last but not least, go Doors. So Drew, I think I'm done. Hopefully we got a few minutes to answer questions if you want to take it from here.
Absolutely. So we did have some questions come in. I would encourage anyone else who thinks of questions now to go ahead and type them in. But I think the first one came when you were talking about, displaying yourself in sound bites, and one of our attendees asked for or against summary bullets at the top of a resume.
Against, because what I want to see is, somebody might say, 20 years of sales experience in the industry, in technology market, blah, blah, blah. That might be okay, but ultimately what I'm looking for is I'm going to go through company, title, tenure. I'm going to draw those conclusions myself. So I almost never look at an objective or summary bullets, anything like that.
Okay, great. Here's another question. A recruiter recently told me not to send a thank you note to a potential employer following an interview. He was adamant on that point, as he said he was my representative and that he thought a thank you note only harmed candidates. Do you agree?
No, I absolutely disagree. I think that's a lost art and a touch of class. So unfortunately, that's the kind of recruiter I think that maybe contributes to some of the reputation the industry has sometimes.
Okay, here's another one. I feel right between the retained and contingent thresholds. Mid-manager in energy, well over 6 figures, but not senior manager yet. Is it too early to start building a relationship with retained recruiters?
No, I don't think so, not at all. Because obviously you're the leadership of tomorrow. You'll probably find maybe a little bit less receptivity potentially, but if you've got a good connection, then it's worth, I think, making the effort. Specifically in your industry, of course, though, the industry is going through a tough time, and so a lot of recruiters in that space are struggling to pay the bills. So that's another thing that will make it potentially a little more challenging in the near term, but definitely not. You have to kind of, I think when you're in that tweener space, career-wise and comp-wise, you have to really consider both of those models.
What are your thoughts about the website Blue Steps?
I just came across that when I was researching this, so I haven't, it's the first time I was aware of it. We're members of it's part of the Association of Executive Search Consultants and Executive Search and Leadership Consultants. They're a very reputable and professional organization. We had the president come and speak a couple of months ago here to us in our office. So I would be, in general, I guess my assumption would be that anything they do is going to be high quality.
How can I determine if my company has a no-touch clause with the Big Four recruiting agencies? I know we did a few years ago.
Good question. It's pretty today with the big agencies like mine, Korn Ferry. It's rare because of our global reach. It's rare for us to say to a company, we won't recruit anybody out of your company anywhere in the world, and that's become even more the case. So that's a good question. Probably the thing to do is if you can try to get in touch with a recruiter from one of the Big Four, but otherwise you're going to have to hope that somebody maybe in the talent acquisition function at your company will reveal that to you.
Okay, here's another one. How would you start an engagement with a recruiter? You said call, then email, but should I propose a quick meeting?
I would stick to, hopefully connecting with them on the phone and then see how that goes. Again, timing is everything. If you're close by, geographically or physically, they may be willing to get together with you for coffee, but we get a lot of these requests, so I think you kind of have to just be realistic about what's achievable. The other thing to think about, of course, always is the company you work for, and is that an opportunity for them to look for business, which is a bit of a kind of cloak and dagger type of approach. But the recruiter may be interested in getting to know you because your company is more broadly a potential client for them. So that's a way to potentially try to leverage that introduction or relationship.
Okay. If you are looking to apply experience in transition industries, do you have any tips for getting recruiters to think creatively about you?
Great question. So unfortunately, recruiters are not being hired by companies to think creatively in the sense of looking for people who are making a move from one industry to another or changing functions. I'm just pretty blunt about that. There is the occasional situation, or sometimes I'm doing a project right now for a global service provider to the retail industry, and we are looking at in industries that are, so we're looking obviously within that industry directly, competitors of theirs, but also then similar businesses that are maybe one or two steps away. So there's a fine line there, but largely when you're trying to make a change, that's where and I've personally experienced this, you have to really, it's more of a network effort.
Can I ask for, or should I respect feedback from the recruiter? This person got their resume handed to a PE group which declined to interview him.
So is the question basically that you're wondering why they didn't move forward with the interview? I'll just assume that's the case. Mm-hmm. Then you can definitely ask the recruiter for sure. They won't always get much feedback, and sometimes we avoid being the bearers of bad news and let the client be the bad guy, which is obviously a bit cowardly, but it's a bit tough to be kind of giving a lot of people all day bad news about, well, you're not moving forward in this process, blah, 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 because you did this or didn't do this. So you can't always count on recruiters, to be totally honest, to give you really straight feedback on what happened with an interview, but it's definitely worth asking. I try to do it for sure as consistently as possible.
Okay, great. We have time for just a couple more here. What am I looking for in an unsolicited opportunity from a recruiter when I'm already employed?
Well, hopefully you have a clear idea about kind of, if you think about what you're going to do the next 2 or 3 years or want to do career-wise and have some aspirations, even at your current company, then does the opportunity that they're coming to you with contain some of that? It's kind of it's a given basically, especially if you're approached as a passive candidate, that you can expect to increase your compensation anywhere from 10 to 20% on the base, and then of course if there are other components of your comp, there's a multiplier effect there. So compensation is a piece. When we're going after passive candidates, then our clients know that they've got to be competitive in the market from that standpoint. So I think it's good to have, maybe a 3 to 5 year plan, and then see what, if opportunities that come to you fit in that box. And then that's when maybe you want to consider that.
Okay, we'll do 2 more. I'm a senior manager looking to make the move to the director level. It's very difficult to get called for director level jobs if you're not already a director. Any suggestions?
Tough. Yeah. I mean, I guess the place I would start is just maybe, what is your LinkedIn profile saying about you? Does it say that you're ready to be a director in terms of, accomplishments and tenure? Is it sending the right message? Because largely that's how people, especially at your level, are finding you, is through LinkedIn. So that's one question, one kind of thought spontaneously. And again, it's also a bit of a timing situation. Is the company willing to consider somebody who's, maybe either going to be a promotion or stretch candidate? Most of the times recruiters are being hired to go and find people who are been there and done that, or doing that right now, and going to come and do the same thing for more money for their client. So, yeah, that's, I guess, a couple of observations.
Okay, and last one, how do I find the right recruiter at a particular firm, i.e. the recruiter who represents the niche, geography, role, et cetera, I'm interested in? I know just getting someone at Korn Ferry and getting my data in your database isn't going to really help. Rather, I think I need to find a person who's focused on my target area.
Yeah, so with Korn Ferry, most of the big firms, you can go on the website and they've got all the consultant profiles and what they specialize in. Even then, it's not as, it's still a question of whether they're going to be responsive to you, especially somebody who's a really high profile, speaker and doing a lot of different things. But largely, recruiters are advertising or talking about themselves in the context of the industry they specialize in, or functional area or level. So hopefully it's you can sort it out either through LinkedIn or through a firm's website. And obviously, if it's Korn Ferry, I'm happy to try to help you.
Great. Well, Will, thank you so much for sharing your insight about recruiters and the recruiting process today. And thank you to everyone who jumped on the call today. I just want to encourage you again to check out all the resources that we have on our website and also in person. This includes some of our other upcoming webinars, including Landing Your Dream Job When You're Not Qualified and Leading Millennials, and also our annual networking night that's taking place in over 30 cities on November 3rd. Later this week, I'm going to be sending a follow-up email with a link that will lead you to registration for these events, and I'll also send the recording of today's presentation. And I'll also send a survey so that you can give us feedback about today. And then also just wanted to wish all of our alumni best of luck as you consider your next steps professionally. And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.